The carriage came up the cliff road in a storm so thick I thought we should be lifted bodily off the ridge and tossed into the North Sea. The driver had not spoken since we changed horses at Alnwick, and I, in turn, had not spoken since the last village. There was nothing left to say. I had a satchel of clean linen, a worn copy of Cowper, 3 sealed letters of character from a small Methodist school in York, and the address of a manor whose name had been said to me twice, in lowered voices. Brackenhall. The first time the agent in London had said it, she had not met my eyes. The second time, when I asked the price of the post, she had said only, "6 girls have come back from there in less than a fortnight, child. The 7th would be you." I had said yes anyway. There was nothing else for me. My mother was a year in her grave, the schoolhouse was closed, and the rent on our 2 rooms in Holborn was due on Lady Day. £40 a year. Board and a fire in your own room is £40. Board and a fire in your own room. I would have gone to a leper colony for less. The lightning came first and the iron gates after. Tall, black, weather-pitted, topped with carved rooks whose stone wings looked, in the white blink of the sky, as if they meant to lift. The driver halted the horses without being told. He climbed down, shouldered the latch, and the gates groaned open on hinges so old they sounded almost human. I leaned forward against the carriage window and saw, far above us at the head of a long gravel drive, a great gray house with a single lit window. One window. In the whole of that vast frontage, one square of warm orange against the black. I remember thinking, very clearly, someone in that house is awake, and someone in that house is afraid. I gathered my dove-gray wool traveling cape closer about my throat. The cape had been my mother's. The collar still smelled faintly of the rose water she had used Sunday mornings, and I pressed my cheek to it for a moment, the way another woman might press a child's hair. Then I straightened and I put on the face I had worn for every difficult thing of my 21 years. The schoolmistress face, the face that did not flinch, the face that said, very quietly, "I have come, and I will do what I came for." The carriage stopped beneath a heavy stone porte-cochere streaming rain. The driver opened the door. He did not offer his hand. He did not say good night. He set my small leather trunk on the wet flagstones and climbed back to his box with the haste of a man who did not wish to be inside the gate when it next clanged shut. I stood under the porte-cochere with my satchel in one hand and my trunk at my feet, and watched his lanterns dwindle down the drive. The gates groaned closed of their own weight before he was halfway to the road. The great front door opened behind me with the soft seal-suck of a house that has been kept dry against weather for 200 years. A woman stood in the gap. She was perhaps 60, in black bombazine, with a chatelaine of keys at her waist and a single tallow candle in a brass stick. She had gray hair drawn back so tightly the skin at her temples shone. Her eyes, when they met mine, were neither kind nor unkind. They were measuring me, the way one measures a sack of meal at market, to see whether the weight matched the price. "You are punctual," she said. "The driver was good," I said. "The driver was paid double to be good," she answered. "Come inside, miss. The hall is cold." She did not take my trunk. She did not call a footman. There were no footmen. I would learn later. The late Duke had kept 7, and the present master had let 6 go inside the first month of his guardianship. The remaining one was at that hour asleep above the stable, and the kitchen maid was locked in her attic and would not come down at this hour for love nor coin. There was, in the whole of Brackenhall that night, the housekeeper, a deaf cook, a gardener who slept in the gatehouse, the Duke himself, and 2 children. And, in another moment, me. I followed her into the entry hall. The single tallow candle threw shadows up walls paneled in dark oak almost to the ceiling. Above the paneling, faded gilt frames held faces I could not see. A great staircase rose at the back of the hall and split, midway, into 2 flights, one to the east wing, one to the west. The floor was black and white marble, much worn at the center, where 2 centuries of feet had passed. Somewhere above us, a clock chimed midnight in a thin silver voice and was answered distantly by a child's cough. The housekeeper noted the cough as one notes the weather. "The little master coughs in damp," she said. "It is nothing. He has the constitution of his mother." She set down the candle on a side table and turned to me. "I am Mrs. Paget. I keep the house. You will receive your instructions from me in matters of the household. You will receive your instructions from His Grace in matters of the children. You will speak to His Grace as little as possible. You will not raise your voice in His hearing. You will not weep where He can see. You will not come down to dinner. Have I been clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Paget." "You are the 7th," she said. "I know. 6 left in less than a fortnight." "I know that too." She studied me a moment longer. Something in her face, not warmth, but something less hostile than the rest of it, softened a fraction. "Yorkshire," she said. "London, Holborn. My mother taught." She picked up the candle. "We shall see." She led me up the great staircase. We took the east flight. The first landing held a tall arched window, and as we passed it the lightning came again and showed me, for one bleached instant, a long gallery hung with portraits. Pale faces in starched ruffs, pale faces in powdered wigs, pale faces in Regency cravats, all of them watching the stairs as if the stairs were a stage. At the head of the gallery was a portrait larger than the rest, a young man and a young woman in summer light, his hand on her waist, her hand on the head of a small, dark-haired girl, a baby boy in her other arm. Even in the lightning, I could see the resemblance. The girl in the portrait had ribbons in her hair. The man had an aquiline nose and gray hooded eyes. "His Grace's brother, Mrs. Paget said without turning. "And her Grace. 3 years gone Michaelmas. The coaching accident." She said it the way one says the gout or the rain. "We do not speak of it in the children's hearing." "No, ma'am." We climbed another flight and turned into a corridor that ran the length of the upper east wing. Brass sconces, unlit. A long carpet, dark with damp at the edges. A row of doors. Mrs. Paget stopped at the third and opened it. "Your room. The nursery is opposite. The schoolroom is the door beyond the nursery, on this side. His Grace's apartments are at the very end of the corridor. You will not pass that door unless summoned. You understand?" "Yes." Lessons begin at 8. The children take their breakfast in the morning room. The schoolroom hours are 9 to 12. Dinner in the schoolroom at 1. Walk on the south lawn at 3. Tea in the nursery at 5. Prayers at 7. Bed at 8. His Grace dines alone. The master will see you tomorrow at noon in the library to take your measure. Until then? She paused. Her voice softened, very slightly, and she did not look at me when she said the next thing. "Lock your door tonight, miss. The wind takes it open in this corner if you do not." "Thank you, Mrs. Paget." She left me on the threshold with my trunk and a single candle in a brass stick. I closed the door, set the candle on the small chest of drawers, and took my first true look at the room I would either live in or run from. It was small. A narrow bed under a sloped ceiling, a chest of drawers, a writing desk under a tall lattice window, a basin and ewer on a stand, a single chair, and a fireplace in which, blessedly, someone had laid a fire that morning and lit it within the last hour. The fire was the kindest thing in the house. I went to it and held my hands a long moment to its warmth, and felt, for the first time since the Alnwick stop, my fingers. Then I heard them. 2 small voices, very low, the way children speak when they are not supposed to be awake. They were on the far side of the wall opposite my fireplace, which meant they were in the nursery, and which meant the nursery shared a wall with my room, and which meant that for whatever happened in the nights to come, I would hear them. I stood very still. "She has come," said a girl's voice. 6 years old by the timbre. Careful enunciation, the kind taught early by a mother. I heard the carriage. "Will she go?" said a smaller voice. 4, perhaps. Sleepy. Like the others? Hush. We mustn't say. But will she? A silence. Then, very softly, "I do not know. I should like one to stay." I closed my eyes. I think it was at that moment, before I had taken off my cape, before I had unpinned my hair, before I had even seen the children's faces, that I made the decision. Not because I was brave. I was not. Not because I had nowhere to go, though I had not. Because 2 children behind a wall had been left enough times to learn the difference between hope and the asking of it. I unpinned my hair. I changed out of the wet traveling cape and the gray wool dress into the only other gown I owned that was suitable for the upper floor of a duke's house. A deep wine-red dressing gown of heavy silk that had been my mother's wedding silk, made down for me when I was 19 and made down again, with cream lace at the throat, when the schoolhouse closed. I touched the small gold cross at my neck, the cross my mother had pressed into my hand on the last night of her life, and I went out into the corridor. The candelabrum stood at the far end of the upper hallway, a tall brass 3-arm thing on a side table, the only light in that long passage. I had the schoolroom key in my pocket. Mrs. Paget had set it on the chest of drawers without a word, and I thought I should look at where I would teach. I had taken 3 steps when I saw him. He was standing outside the nursery door, a tall man, broad in the shoulder, dark-haired, in a fitted indigo tailcoat over a black silk waistcoat, white silk cravat tied loosely as if he had clawed at it earlier in the evening, fawn breeches, riding boots polished but spattered at the calf with the dark wet of a man who had ridden in the storm and not yet changed. His hair was overlong, wet at the ends, raked back from a high forehead and falling to his shoulders. His face I could not see clearly at first. He was turned 3/4 from me, looking at the nursery door, and his fists were clenched at his sides, white at the knuckles. He had not heard the children, or he had, and that was why his fists were clenched. I could not tell. I think I should have gone back to my room. A girl with sense would have. The wind in the eaves and the rain on the windows would have covered the sound of the door if I closed it gently. He would not have known I was there. I could have begun in the morning, in good clean daylight, with a housekeeper at my elbow and a hot pot of tea between us. I could have begun, that is, like the 6 who came before. I did not go back to my room. I stepped into the candlelight. He turned. The single candelabrum threw warm gold across one side of his face and left the other in deep blue shadow from the storm window, and I saw, in that strange double light, the man the village said had killed his sister-in-law with the force of his rage. Deep hooded gray eyes, sharp aquiline nose, fine Roman jaw with 2 days of stubble, a thin pale scar along the left line of his jaw, white in the candlelight. He was very pale beneath the tan. His nostrils flared once when he saw me, and he stepped, I think, to put himself between me and the nursery door, though at the time I did not understand it, and his fists tightened further at his sides. "Who are you?" His voice was low and terrible, the kind of low that does not need to be loud. "Who let you up here?" I did not curtsy. I did not speak yet. I let the question sit a moment in the candlelight between us, because I had learned, teaching boys at my mother's school, that the first thing one does with a frightening voice is not give it a frightened answer. I folded my hands at my waist over the small gold cross. I lifted my chin a 1/4 inch, and then I said, very quietly, almost in a whisper, "Your Grace, the children are listening through the door. I will not raise my voice in their hearing, and I will be very grateful if you do not raise yours." He stopped. The fists did not unclench at once. The hooded gray eyes did not soften at once. But something in him stopped, the way a horse stops when the rein is pulled with the right hand at the right second. Not by force, but by surprise. He looked at me. He looked then at the nursery door, not 3 feet from his shoulder, and I watched the color go out of his face. He had not known. He had ridden in late, and he had come up to look at the door he could not bring himself to open, and he had not known that 2 small bodies were pressed against the inside of it, listening to him breathe. His fists opened slowly. He turned his face away from me and pressed the back of one wrist against his mouth, and for a moment I thought he might be ill, or weep. He did neither. He swallowed once and lowered his hand and turned back. The candlelight caught the wet at the corner of one eye, but I did not see it, because I had decided already that I would not see it, that the dignity of a man in such a moment is to be allowed. "Forgive me," he said. The terrible low voice was still low, but it was not terrible now. It was only tired. "Forgive me, miss. I had not. I beg your pardon." I inclined my head a fraction. "There is nothing to forgive, your grace?" "There is." He looked at the door again. I am not good at this hour." "No, your grace." "You arrived at midnight." "Yes, your grace." "In a storm." "Yes." "You are the 7th." "I am." He looked at me a long moment in that strange double light, the warm amber on one cheek, the cold blue of the storm window on the other. I thought then, and I think now, that I had never seen a man so cleanly halved between 2 kinds of light, and so wholly inhabited by both. He drew a breath. "You will go in the morning," he said. It was not an order. It was a fact, said the way one says the tide will come in, or the rooks will roost. "I shall not, your grace." He did not answer that. He did not, I saw later, know how to. He only nodded once, as if he had heard something he did not wish to argue with at that hour, and stepped aside from the nursery door. The door opened. 6 small fingers and then a small dark head, 2 ribbons, 1 slipping, and then the whole of her, 6 years old, in a long white muslin nightgown, barefoot on the cold oak. She did not look at her uncle. She did not even look at the candelabrum. She looked at me, and her gray-blue eyes were the steadiest eyes I have ever met in a child of her age. "Miss," she said, "are you the new one?" "I am," I said. "Will you go?" "I shall not." She walked past her uncle as if he were not there. He flinched when she passed him. I saw it. A small full-body flinch like a man brushed by a hot iron. And she came directly to me and put her small, cool hand into mine. Her hand was very small. The bones of it felt through her skin, like a sparrow's bones. "My brother is afraid of the thunder," she said. "Will you tuck us in tonight, please?" "Yes," I said. "Both of us?" "Both." She turned her face up to me. "Have you a story?" "I have a book of poems." "What poems?" "Cowper." "Is that very dull?" "It is very gentle." "Then yes." She tugged me, by the hand, to the nursery door. I looked once at the Duke as we passed him. He was standing with both hands now open at his sides, and he had stepped back another half-pace into the blue shadow as if to make himself smaller, as if to apologize with the whole of his body, and his gray eyes followed us not with anger, but with something I had not expected in him at all. I should not have called it hope. I should have called it permission to hope. I went into the nursery. A single fire, low. A nursemaid asleep in a corner chair with her mouth open. 2 small carved oak beds. The boy was sitting up in his pale gray eyes too large in his small white face, a worn wooden horse clutched in his fist. The girl let go of my hand to climb into her own bed. I sat on the edge of the boy's bed first and put my hand on his hair lightly, because thunder is an old enemy, and a child must be allowed to keep his pride. It only sounds large, I said. How do you know? Because I have heard it from many windows now, and it has never come into the room. He considered this. He had the gravity of a 4-year-old who has been thinking for some weeks that the world is dangerous in ways adults do not seem to admit. He held out the wooden horse to me as one holds out a treasure to a stranger one has decided to trust. His leg is broken, he said. I took the horse. One foreleg had been splintered off above the hoof, and the splinter was tied back on with a careful child's knot of crimson silk, the silk grimy from a small thumb. Whose knot is this? I asked. Mine, he said. It is a very fine knot. He nodded once, gravely. May I read to you both? I said. Yes. I took out the cowper from my dressing gown pocket. I opened it to a page my mother had marked in pencil years ago. The Task. Book the first. I sing the sofa. And I read in the voice my mother had read to me on winter nights in Holborn, low and unhurried. The voice that does not perform, but only carries. I read about the rough, shaggy bench in the meadow, and the ploughman home from his furrow, and the parlor fire that warms the cottager. The boy's fingers loosened on the wooden horse before I had finished the second page. The girl, in her own bed, watched me with the steady gray-blue eyes for another half a page, and then her lashes lowered. I did not stop reading. I read on through the parlor fire and the cottager's prayer, low, 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 until both their breathings had settled into the long, even rhythm that is the sound a child makes when he has decided he is safe. I closed the book. I tucked the boy's blanket under his chin. I took the wooden horse from his open palm and set it gently on the small chest at the head of his bed, where his hand could find it in the morning. I went to the girl. I drew her quilt up to her shoulder and tucked the loose ribbon of her hair behind her ear. I kissed neither of them. I did not yet have that right. I rose. I turned to leave. The Duke was standing in the nursery doorway. He had not moved a step into the room. He stood at the threshold with one hand on the doorframe, as if the threshold itself were something he had to ask permission to cross, and he had been watching us, I think, the whole of the reading. The candlelight was behind him in the corridor, and the firelight was in front of him in the nursery, and the two lights met across his face, and I saw, plainly, that he had been weeping. He had not made a sound. His face was wet in 2 tracks from the outer corner of each eye, and he had not lifted a hand to wipe them away, because to lift a hand would have been to admit they were there. I went to him quietly. I did not look at his face when I reached him. I only spoke very low, the way one speaks to a horse in a stall. They are asleep, Your Grace. Yes. I will sit with them an hour, if I may. Yes. And in the morning, with your leave, I should like to begin the schoolroom hours at 9. Mrs. Paget has explained the day. Yes. Good night, Your Grace. He did not answer. I think he could not. I went past him out into the corridor and back to my own door, and I stood with my hand on my own latch a long minute, listening to the storm. Then I went back into the nursery and I did sit the hour. I sat by the low fire with the cowper closed in my lap, and I watched 2 small shapes breathe. And I did not weep, because I had decided some hours earlier that I would not weep where the children might see, and a sleeping child can see further than a waking one. That was the first night. The morning came gray, but no longer storming. The sea was the color of pewter under a pewter sky. I had slept 3 hours in my own bed after returning from the nursery, and I rose at 6, washed in cold water from the basin, dressed in my second day dress, sober brown wool, white linen collar, pinned my hair, and went down to the morning room. The morning room faced east over the cliff garden and was the only room of Brackenhall's lower floor I had yet seen by light. It had pale green walls and white cornice work and 3 tall windows, and at the long mahogany table sat the children. Both of them. Already dressed. The girl in a small white muslin day frock with a pink sash, the boy in a blue jacket and short trousers with stockinged calves and small black slippers. Both were eating porridge with the careful, mannered slowness of children who have been told for some time that good manners may protect them. I came in. Both of them looked up. The girl was the one who said it. She set down her spoon. She slid out of her chair without asking leave. She walked the length of the table to me and laid her cheek against my hip, and said, in a clear little voice that carried to every corner of the morning room and to the doorway behind me, where Mrs. Paget had just appeared with a fresh pot. "Good morning, Mamma." I do not know what my face did. I know that Mrs. Paget's hand stopped midway to the table, and that a single drop of hot tea fell from the spout of her pot onto the polished mahogany and beaded there like a small brown jewel. I know that the boy slid out of his own chair without a word and crossed to my other side and laid his small dark head against the back of my hand, the hand that held the wooden horse he had given me to carry down. I know that for some seconds I did not move, because I could not yet, in that one breath, decide what I was permitted to do. And then I heard him in the doorway, the Duke. He had come down silently, in clean morning dress now, dark blue coat, fresh white cravat, the wet hair from the night before brushed and tied back with a black ribbon at his nape. He had stopped in the doorway, as if he had walked into a window pane. "Children." "Good morning, Uncle," the girl said, without releasing my hip. She did not look at him. She said it kindly, but firmly, the way one might say to the postman, "You may go now." "She is staying." I felt the faintest pressure of a small hand finding mine under the tablecloth ruffle of my dress. I bent. I touched the boy's hair. I touched the girl's shoulder. I did not say Mama back. I had no right to it yet. But I did say what I had a right to say. "Good morning, my loves." And the boy, into the back of my hand, said, "Mama, are there eggs?" "There are eggs," Mrs. Paget said very quickly, and turned her face away from me to the sideboard, and I saw the line of her jaw work twice, and then settle. "There are eggs." I sat down between them at the table. I did not look toward the doorway. After a long moment I heard the soft scuff of a riding boot on the morning room threshold, and when I did at last lift my eyes, the Duke had stepped back into the corridor, only his shoulder still visible, his hand braced flat against the corridor wall, his head bent as if he had been struck. He stood there the rest of the meal. He did not come in. He did not speak. When the children had finished and were taken up by Mrs. Paget to be dressed for the schoolroom, I rose, smoothed my skirts, gathered my cowper from where I had set it on the sideboard, and walked to the doorway. He had not raised his head. "Your Grace," I said. "Miss," his voice was hoarse, "I shall begin lessons at 9. "Yes." And, "Your Grace, they are very small?" "Yes." "Whatever you and I are to be to one another, however long I am to be in this house, may I beg one thing?" He looked up at me at last. His gray hooded eyes were red at the rims. "Anything." "That you come to the schoolroom this afternoon at 3 and walk with us in the Cliff Garden. They—" I hesitated, because the word was not quite mine to say, but I said it anyway, because in that hour someone had to. "They need their father." He did not correct me. I had said father, not uncle, and he heard it, and he did not correct me. "At 3, he said. The first month was not gentle. There were nights he came back from the village late and bone-cold with brandy on his breath, and there were mornings he did not appear at all. There were 3 different evenings on which I heard the shatter of glass from the library, once a decanter, once a window pane, once a portrait taken off the wall and dropped from the gallery rail to the marble below. The first time I heard it, I stood up in the schoolroom where I had been mending the boy's stocking after 8, and I went to the corridor with my heart loud in my ears, and I met Mrs. Paget at the head of the stairs. "Stay," Mrs. Paget said. Her face was gray. He does no harm to person, only to glass. He is alone down there. He is. Mrs. Paget, may I? Miss. Mrs. Paget put her hand briefly, only briefly, to my forearm. It was the first time she had touched me. It is not the children's cry that he answers to. He does not yet know that any other voice may reach him. If you wish to try, that is your matter, and on your head be it. I cannot stop you any more. I went down the great staircase in my dressing gown with a candle. The library door was ajar. He was sitting on the floor in front of the fireless hearth in his shirt sleeves, with the smashed portrait beside him. His brother's, I saw in the candlelight. The brother's young, laughing face cracked across the cheek by a single jagged break, and he had his head in his hands. He had not heard me on the stair. He did not hear me on the threshold. I set the candle on a small table, and I came across the carpet without speaking, and I sat down on the floor a yard from him, not close enough to touch, close enough to be there. I did not speak. After perhaps a quarter of an hour, in which the only sound was the wind in the cliff and his uneven breathing, he said into his hands, "They were 3 days married. He had asked her at 16. Did you know that?" "No, Your Grace." "He asked her at 16, and she said yes at 16, and our father refused, and she waited. She waited 8 years. She went to no other ball. She would dance with no other man. She was 24 at the wedding. He was 26. They were 3 days married. 3 days. When our father died. And so they had to come north. And the road by Berwick." He stopped. "You need not tell me, Your Grace." "I do." His hands did not lift from his face. "I do, because I have not told it. And I sit in this house and do not tell it, and I cannot. I cannot." "Then tell it." So he told me. He told me how the messenger had come to him in London, how he had ridden the 8 days north with the children's nurse and an under coachman, how he had arrived at Brackenhall to find 2 small bodies in the nursery who had been told, by a stranger, that their parents were not coming home. He told me how the boy had not spoken at all for the first month, how the girl had asked every morning for 14 mornings, when she might go to her mother, and how on the 15th morning she had stopped asking and had instead, very quietly, begun to address her brother in her mother's voice. He told me how he had not known how to be in a nursery, how the first governess had come, and the girl had bitten her on the wrist on the second evening, and the woman had left in the morning. How the second had come, and the girl had not bitten her, but had refused to speak to her at all, and the woman had left within the week. How the third had been kind, and the girl had loved her. And then the third had come to him in the library after a fortnight to say she had been offered a better place by a cousin in Bath, and he had broken a glass against the mantelpiece in front of her, because to lose another adult in those children's lives had felt to him, he said, like watching his brother drown a second time, and the woman had fled the house in tears that night, and the girl had not spoken to him for 11 days. He told me about the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. He told me he had begun to believe, by the 6th, that he was the wreckage, that whatever room he entered became the room with the broken thing in it, that he had begun to time his hours so as to be away from the nursery, the morning room, the schoolroom, to be in the stables, the cliff path, the village inn, anywhere, and that the worse it had become, the more sure he had been that the children were safer with anyone in the house but him. "And then you came," he said. "I came. At midnight." "Yes." "And you did not flinch." "No, Your Grace." "Why?" I thought a long moment. The fire was out. The candle was low. Outside, the sea did its slow gray work on the rocks below the cliff. I did not know, at 21, why I had not flinched. I had not been brave in any other room of my life. I had wept at smaller things. I had hidden once behind a tea urn from a curate who was unkind. I knew nothing of dukes and rage and great houses. I knew only what I had heard the night before, through the wall. Because I heard them ask, I said, through the wall. The little master asked his sister whether I would go like the others. And she said she did not know. And she said she should like one to stay. He lifted his head. His face in the dying candle was a young face, younger than 32. I had not seen it before. I had seen only the older face it wore in the daylight, the face it had built for itself. Under that face was a man not very much older than I was, who had ridden 8 days north in fear and had not yet been allowed to set down the fear. And so you stayed. And so I stayed. He nodded once. He set his hand, palm up, on the carpet between us. He did not reach. He only opened his hand. I looked at the open hand for a long moment, and then I laid mine across it, my fingers in his palm, and his fingers closed once around mine. Not for love, not yet. For something older and plainer than love, the way a drowning swimmer closes his hand around the gunwale of a boat. And after a count of 3, I drew my hand gently back and stood up. You will sleep now, Your Grace. Yes. In the morning, at 3, I shall walk the children to the rose walk along the cliff. Will you come? I will come. Good night, Your Grace. Good night, miss. I went up the stairs. I did not look back. I did not need to. There were smaller things, too, in the first weeks, that nobody had warned me of. There was the moment, on the 4th morning, when I went down to the kitchen at 6:30 and found the deaf cook, Mrs. Hardy, kneading bread at the great scrubbed deal table by lamplight, and she did not hear me come in, and she turned at last and saw me and crossed herself with a floured hand and said, "Lord bless me, miss, I thought you a ghost." There was the moment on the 7th evening when I found a small folded paper under my door, a child's letter in a 6-year-old hand, 4 words and 7 letters of the alphabet wrong, that said only, "Please do not go." I kept that paper. I keep it still. There was the moment on the 11th night when the boy woke screaming from a dream in which the road by Berwick was under his bed, and I came across the corridor barefoot and gathered him out of the bed and held him at the nursery window in the moonlight until he could see, with his own waking eyes, that the road was where it had always been, far away under the cliff, and not under his bed at all. There was the moment, also, on the 15th day, when I came down the great staircase at noon for my appointment in the library. The appointment Mrs. Paget had told me of on the first night, and which the Duke had never, in fact, summoned me to keep. And I found him at the foot of the stairs in riding dress with his hat in his hand and a packet of letters under his arm. He had not slept, I thought. The hooded gray eyes were dark beneath, and the stubble had gone a day longer than was respectable. He stopped at the bottom step. He looked up at me. He had been about to ride to the village. He had been, by all the evidence of the packet under his arm, about to post a letter dismissing me on whatever terms the law of guardianship allowed him. He did not post the letter. I came down the last 3 steps and stopped on the 4th from the bottom, so that we were almost of a height, and I said, very quietly, "Your Grace, the schoolroom has begun without you. The little master cannot this morning find his slate pencil. Will you come and look for it with him?" He looked at the packet of letters under his arm. He looked at me. He looked, for a long second, at the great front door. And then, without a word, he tucked the packet inside his coat, set his hat on the side table by the stairs, and went up past me to the schoolroom. He did not come down for an hour. When he came down, the slate pencil had been found, by him, behind a sofa cushion, where it had been put for safekeeping. The boy explained gravely, by the girl, who had been afraid the new governess would scold its loss. And the boy was holding the man's first finger in a fist, and was leading him by that finger down the gallery to show him the row of small brown shells he had collected from the cliff path the week before. I stood in the schoolroom doorway and watched them go. I do not think the man knew yet that he had been led. I do not think he knew, either, that the packet of letters in the inside pocket of his riding coat would, that night, find its quiet way into the morning room fire. But I knew. I had felt the door of the house, in that hour, turn on its hinges in some other direction than the one it had been turning in for 3 years. That was the first month. The second month was easier. The third month was a kind of grace. The second month brought spring up the cliff. Snowdrops first in the rough grass at the foot of the south wall, then primroses in the lee of the kitchen garden, then the first daffodils along the gravel drive where the wind was kindest. The children, who had been pale through the winter, took color in their cheeks. The boy began to speak in whole sentences instead of single words, and the girl, who had spoken in whole sentences from the first, began to laugh. Small at first, half swallowed, as if she were not sure laughter were permitted in this house, and then larger, and at last a true child's laugh that ran out of her, like water out of a jug. The first time I heard it, she was being chased around the schoolroom table by her brother with a small wooden sword, and the laugh came out of her without warning and stopped both of them in their tracks. They looked at each other. They looked at me. The girl's gray-blue eyes filled. She set the sword down on the table very carefully and crossed to me and pressed her face into my apron, and the boy, after a moment, came and pressed himself into my other side, and we three stood there in the schoolroom for what may have been a quarter hour while the girl wept the slow, patient tears that come of a child who has not allowed herself, for 38 months, to be a child. I let her weep. I did not shush her. I had learned by then that the things in this house had been put down too long unspoken, and the house wanted them said. That was the day I went, after the children were in bed, to the small private sitting room off the library where my husband, though he was not yet my husband then, only my master and the man I was beginning to love, wrote his letters in the evenings. I knocked. He bade me come in. He stood when I entered, as he had begun, by then, to do. He had begun, also, to set down his pen when I spoke, and to look at my face when I asked him a question, and to wait for my answer the way one waits for the weather to clear. Small courtesies. They had not been there in the first week. They were there in the 7th. I did not sit. I stood by his desk and I said, "Your Grace, the children have not been to their parents' grave." He set the pen down. The hooded gray eyes lifted to mine. "No," he said. "They have not. They are old enough. I have been afraid to take them. I know. I have been afraid that to take them would be to undo whatever. He could not find the word. I gave it to him. Whatever has begun in them this year. Yes. It will not undo it. It will help it. They have made a nursery into a mausoleum because they have not been allowed to go to the proper one. We will go on Sunday after church, all 4 of us, and we will put primroses there, and we will say what we mean, and we will come home to tea. I have already told Mrs. Paget to bake a seed cake. He did not argue. He had stopped arguing with me by the 2nd month. Not because I bullied him, I hope, but because we had begun, by then, to find that we were of one mind on most matters concerning the children, and on the few we were not. He had begun to find that I was, generally, right. He nodded. He drew his desk blotter toward him. He wrote, in his fine, clear hand, a note to the rector requesting that the chapel yard be tidied along the path to the family vault before Sunday. He sealed it. He gave it to me to give to the gardener in the morning. And then he stood, and he came around the desk, and he stopped a yard from me, and he said, very low, "I should not be able to bear this house without you. I know, Your Grace. I do not know how to say what I— You need not say it tonight." No? No. Say it when the children are not within hearing of the saying. Say it when you are sure of it. Say it once. Plainly, and I will answer. You will answer? I will answer. He nodded. He did not touch me. He did not, in the second month, in the third, in the fourth, lay a hand on me at all except by accident, a brushed sleeve at a doorway, a hand under my elbow on a wet stair, the ordinary courtesies of a careful man. And I was glad of it, because the children were watching, always, and the children needed first to know that I was theirs, and the order of the loves of this house had to be plainly written before any other letter could be added to it. We went to the grave on Sunday. It was a clear, cold March day, and the chapel yard was full of crocus, and the rector, the same kind old man who would, 15 months later, marry us, read the prayer for those at rest very gently, and the boy laid his small primroses on the stone with both hands, and the girl laid hers, and after a long, quiet moment the girl said, quite clearly, to the air, "Mama, I have a new mama, but she is yours too. I told her about you. She knows the song." And then she put her hand in mine, and we walked back through the lich gate to the carriage, and we had seed cake at home, and I was 4 people's mamma by then, and one of them was lying under a stone in March crocus and would never know me, and I loved her too. I have loved her every day since. There is room, in a great old house, for 2 mothers. There is room, in a child's heart, for as many loves as the child can carry. By the 3rd month he had stopped riding to the village inn after dinner. By the 3rd month the decanters were unbroken, the windows whole, the gallery portraits hanging where they belonged. By the 3rd month he came up to the schoolroom at 3 on most afternoons with his hat in his hand and waited at the threshold until the girl raised her eyes from her sums and ran to him. He did not pick her up. He had learned, I had watched him learn, that a child who has been taught by losses to be careful of touch must be allowed to come to the touch in her own time. He bent. He let her put her small hand in his. He let the boy clamber, after a fortnight more, onto his boot, onto his actual riding boot, both small slippered feet on the polished black leather, the small thin arms wrapped around the man's calf. And he did not lift his foot, because the boy had asked 100 small permissions before he had asked that one, and to deny him would have been to undo 100 small yeses. We walked, in the 3rd month, to the Cliff Garden every afternoon at 3. The Cliff Garden was a long stone-walled rectangle that ran along the seaward edge of the manor, and it had been planted by the late Duke's wife in the 3rd year of her marriage with old red roses. The roses bloomed in June. By the time my 3rd month was out, the Cliff Garden was a long pink and crimson room open to the sea, and the children ran between the bushes and the man and I walked behind them at a distance, and he did not, for a long time, find the words to say what he wanted to say to me. He found them in the 4th month. We were standing at the low stone wall at the seaward end. The children were on their bellies in the path looking at a beetle. The wind had come up off the sea. He cleared his throat, and I knew without turning that the careful man beside me had come to a sentence he had been carrying for some weeks. "I should not have shouted at you in the upper hall that night." "No, Your Grace. I should have known they were behind the door. I should have known they listened. I should have known a great many things I did not know. You know them now. Because of you. Because of them. They taught you. I only stopped you in the hallway long enough to be taught." He did not answer that for a long moment. Then he said, very low, "You called me father once, to the children, in the morning room. Do you remember?" "I remember." "You had no right to it then." "No. You have it now." I did not turn my face to him. I watched the beetle. I watched the boy lay one careful finger in the path of the beetle so the beetle had to go around. I watched the girl correct him gently, telling him beetles do not like to be steered. I watched the wind take a strand of my hair across my mouth, and I let it lie there because to lift my hand to it would have ended the moment. I am glad of it, I said. I had thought, he said, that I should ask you when the year was up, whether you would consent, whether you would. He stopped. He began again, more plainly. The girl asked me, a week ago, whether you would always be Mama. I told her I did not know. She asked me why I did not know. I told her that to be Mama in this house is a thing for which the law requires a wedding, and I had not asked. She told me, in the tone she has from her mother, that I was being slow. I laughed then. I could not help it. I laughed a soft, small laugh at the cliff wall and the wind and the absurdity of being proposed to, by proxy, by a 6-year-old girl with 2 ribbons. She is not slow, I said. No. I am not slow either, Your Grace. No, miss. You ought to ask in your own time. I shall. He did, in the autumn, in the orchard at dusk, with the boy asleep on his shoulder and the girl walking beside him with her hand in mine. He did not kneel. He did not produce a ring. He stopped under an apple tree heavy with russets, and he turned to me and he said plainly, "Will you stay always?" "Yes," I said. "As Mama?" "Yes." "As my wife?" "Yes." The girl said, drowsy, "I told you she would." The boy did not wake. He only nuzzled closer into the man's shoulder and said something in his sleep that sounded like horse, and the 4 of us walked back through the orchard in the gray-gold autumn light to the door of Brackenhall, and Mrs. Paget opened the door before we reached it, because she had been watching, and she stepped aside without a word to let me pass, and as I went by her she said, very low and only to me, "Welcome home, ma'am." I cried then, quietly, not where the children could see. I cried into the shoulder of Mrs. Paget's bombazine in the alcove behind the hall door for perhaps a minute, and she put her hand once on my back, between my shoulder blades, the way my mother had used to, and she said, "There, ma'am, there, there." The wedding was in the small chapel in the village in June, 1 year almost to the day from the night I had come up the cliff road in the storm. I had wanted a small wedding. He had wanted whatever I had wanted. The chapel sat among the elms at the foot of the village, and the village had filled it, because the village had heard, by then, that the 7th governess at Brackenhall had stayed, and that the rages had stopped, and that the 2 little ones were at the manor on the cliff growing sturdy and brown, and the village had decided, in the way villages do, to claim the credit for it. The morning came soft. The sky over the elms was a clean June blue without a cloud, and the chapel doorway was hung in white roses and pink roses from the cliff garden, and the bell rang at 10, and I walked from the lich gate to the porch with my arm in Mrs. Paget's, because I had no father to give me, and Mrs. Paget had said, the night before, "I shall do, ma'am, if I shall," and I had said, "You shall." At the porch I stopped. I had wanted, in that one moment, to look back once at the road. The road came down the hill from the cliff and bent away to the south. I looked at it. I thought of the woman in the dove-gray wool cape who had come up that road in the other direction, in a black carriage in a storm, in the dark, with her 3 letters of character and her worn cowper on a 40-pound post, on a last chance, on a yes spoken to an agent in London who had not met her eyes. I thought of how she had stepped out of the carriage at the iron gates and seen, in the lightning, the carved rooks on the finials lift their stone wings. I thought of how she had thought then that the only kind thing in the whole house was the fire in her own grate. I thought of how wrong she had been. I turned. I went into the chapel. He was standing at the altar in a coat the color of the autumn orchards, and a white silk waistcoat and a fresh white cravat, and his shoulder-length dark hair was tied back at the nape with a white ribbon. And beside him, at the altar, not behind, not in the front pew, but at the altar, stood a small dark-haired girl in a white muslin frock with a pink sash, and a small dark-haired boy in a blue jacket and short trousers, and stockinged calves, and small black slippers polished by the gardener at 4 o'clock that morning, and both of them were holding out their hands. I came down the aisle to them. I did not look at the pews. I did not look at the rector. I looked at the 4 hands, too large, too small. I gave my left hand to the girl. I gave my right hand to the boy. I let them lead me the last 3 steps to him. The rector cleared his throat. The rector was a kind old man who had baptized the late Duke, and had buried the late Duke and his wife, and had, 3 months ago, baptized the boy at last. His christening had been postponed, in the chaos of the accident, 3 years and 7 months, and had been done quietly at Eastertide with the girl as godmother, and Mrs. Paget as godmother again, and me holding the bowl. The rector said, "Dearly beloved." I held the children's hands all through the vows. I did not let go. He did not ask me to. He had asked the rector before the service whether it would be allowed, and the rector, being a kind old man, had said that the Lord was God of small children chiefly, and that if the Lord could find no objection, then the bishop, who was in any case in Durham, was unlikely to either. When the rector said, "I now pronounce you man and wife," the boy, very gravely, kissed the back of my right hand, and the girl, very gravely, kissed the back of my left, and only then did I let go of them, and only then did I turn to my husband, and only then did he put his hand under my chin and lift my face to him and kiss me, once, softly, on the mouth, in the small Northumbrian chapel that smelled of roses and old hymnals and the sea 1/2 mile away. We came out of the porch into the June light. The bell rang. The village threw rose petals and barley grains. Mrs. Paget, standing at the lych gate in a new black bombazine she had bought herself in Newcastle for the occasion, had a handkerchief pressed to one eye and was pretending it was the sun. The boy had clambered up onto his father's hip, and the girl had taken my hand again, and we 4 stood on the porch step in a half-circle while the rector smiled and the village smiled, and someone in the back of the crowd called out, "God bless your grace and her grace and the bairns." And the boy waved his small free hand at the village, and the girl tightened her fingers in mine, and my husband's arm came around my shoulders and rested there, and I thought, I had come up the cliff road in a storm at midnight with 3 letters of character and £40 a year. I had thought myself the 7th and the last and the lost. I had been told by an agent in London who had not met my eyes that I would not stay. I had been told by a coachman who did not say good night that I would not stay. I had been told by a housekeeper with a chatelaine of keys that I would not stay. I had been told by the man himself at the candlelit door of the nursery that I would go in the morning. I had not gone in the morning. I had not gone for 1 year, and I would not go for any of the years after. And the children had named me Mamma at breakfast on the first of them, and the man had named me Wife at the altar on the last of them, and the village named me Her Grace from that morning on. They were wrong. The village. I was none of those names first. I was, first and always after, the 7th governess of Brackenhall. The one who heard, through a wall on a stormy midnight, 2 small voices saying I should like one to stay, and decided, in her wet traveling cape, in a small candlelit room under a sloped ceiling, before she had seen a single one of the faces she would come to love, that one would. And so one did. And so, reader, did I.